an academic or you're a regular guy. We have to be fearless.
FrontlineTV.com.
Dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Frontline with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go into the breach on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Joe Resinello, I want to jump right into it today, okay? We have to, you know what, Joe? Obviously, you know, there's a lot of people out there. We agree with them. We know that they're saying the right thing. They're talking about the right things. Tyranny is a word that I think has to constantly be reiterated, but also we have to let people, Joe, know what we mean by it. Why do I say that? Because unlike the left, we don't just throw words around, Joe. Okay? If we use a word, it's because we're appropriately using that word. And what I want to focus on tonight, Joe Resinello, we have a few examples for our audience out there that's joining us on the Crusade channel of tyranny. Kind of like what are we talking about when we use that word? The reaction we ought to have against it, okay? Because we have examples in history and recent history, 20th century history, particularly us as Catholics, how to speak up against tyranny. We have to talk about how in the culture, there's cultural tyranny, Joe, not just coming from the government, okay? There's cultural tyranny. Eric Sammons wrote a good article in Crisis Magazine. The title of it is, Joe, You Will Comply, okay? That's tyrannical when somebody says you will comply, and that's not the government doing it, okay? And then we have to talk about Wall Street. We have to talk about Wall Street and how they're employing tyrannical and, yes, fascistic. But, Joe, I use the word, again, we define our terms. We use words appropriately. When we say fascist, we know what we're talking about, unlike the left that just throws that word around. Joe, if you ask the average Looney Tune Antifa, they couldn't even identify for you what fascism is. They couldn't even define it for you, okay? We know what it is. And we have to talk about that because John Horvat, a friend of the show, Joe, he wrote an article. I think he's spot on. You wonder, because we talked about it a little bit a few days ago. You wonder where these corporations are going. It's like, do you worry about your bottom line? Don't you worry about your bottom line? Are you woke? Are you not woke? Like, what's going on? We have to hash that out. So this is going to be a really good conversation. We encourage you all out there that, you know, whenever you find Joe and I and wherever you find us, in any way you can help us, whether it be a like, a subscribe, a share, do all that fun stuff. But, Joe, let's jump right into it, because you want to know something, Joe? People think tyranny can't happen in America. I'd argue it's already here.
Well, I guess the first article we're going to be talking about is from Regis Martin. He says, yes, it can happen here. The thing that jumps right out at me on that is the Lion of Munster.
Yeah,
Holy Christopher Columbus.
I never actually heard of this bishop, but yes, he's the Lion of Munster. Go ahead.
He's Count what was his name?
Clemens August von Galen.
Christopher Columbus. That's quite a name. But basically, he warned, and I'm just going to give you a little quote. He basically said, we must not think we can escape the judgment of Almighty God. Remember, God is very patient. He's always patient with us. But ultimately, his patience runs out. We've seen that time and time again throughout history. He said this: once we admit the right to kill unproductive persons, he argued, then none of us can be sure of his life. We shall be at the mercy of any committee that can put a man on the list of unproductives. Now, we've seen this already. We've seen this in the abortion situation. We've even seen this in the elderly. There are states in America which legalize euthanasia. I mean, if you've gone through a situation with a relative, I recently did with my dad. He was on hospice for probably close to 18 months. My wife and I were just talking about it. The hospitals just get sick of you. They just want you to go on hospice. Life means very little. This is at a very good hospital too, by the way, a top 50 hospital in America, just to throw that out there to you. So, I mean, people are not, respecting people who can't basically produce. And like he said, you become someone who gets put on a list. And we're seeing that with abortion. But I just want to throw this out.
But, Joe, I want to just put it in one quick context. I'm not correcting you in any way, but let's make sure the audience knows that Bishop von Galen, the context is he was railing against the Nazi regime. So I'm not. I think you might have alluded to it quickly, but I want to make sure people know. We are comparing what we're going through now in our throwaway culture, which I'm going to kick right back to you, Joe Resinello, on the Crusade channel. Comparing that, yes, to the unproductive list that the Nazis came up with. So he was railing against Nazis, but I'm going to give it
No,
back to
no,
you.
I hear you. I'm just saying, like, we're doing the same thing, but what I was going to put out to you is, like, obviously people on the right will agree with us, particularly people who are Orthodox Jews and people say like traditional evangelicals or traditional Catholics. They'll agree, but a lot of people won't. You know, like abortion, like they used to say it's like a clump of cells. They can't anymore because the science, you know, the word gets thrown around so much nowadays,
Mhm.
it's kind of lost its value. But the science is just too in your face. I mean, if you've had a child and you go to get a sonogram, you could actually get a 3D sonogram of the kid.
Right.
And it's like watching a movie and you're like, whoa. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just so in your face. You can't
Mhm.
you can't not call it a kid because it's a kid. You can't, you're not. I mean,
Right.
but here's the thing. How do we reach out to those people? Because clearly we have viewed it. You hear the arguments on C-SPAN. These are you know, educated people in very serious positions across the government as well as in, you know, the private sector, and they'll view these children as, you know, into a group, a bucket that you can get rid of. How do we reach out to them? And you know, that's a very hard thing to do. Like I was thinking about this before the show. I mean, how do you can have helps make someone connect that dot? Someone that's not like on either side of the spectrum. The person who lives on Main Street in Kansas.
Joe, here's my thing, okay? I think what we have, especially in modern times, is this idea that society, first of all, there is no God. We both know that, right? Because they told us, and all you good people out there listening to us, they told us there is no God. So, what is the next logical step? All right. And this is, I think, an answer to your question because many, not all, let's be fair, many of these people I do not think you could reach. And the reason why is what I'm about to say. Number one, they killed God. And as Nietzsche said, well, once you kill God, you have to replace him and you have to replace him with yourself. So they become God. The other thing is this, too. There's no justice, there's no afterlife, there's no heaven, there's no hell. So what they're going to do is because they find themselves fortunate enough because evolution made them the way they were and they're not sick, that they could then try to perfect society and somehow, again, like the Nazis did, okay, by getting rid of those who are unproductive, those who have infirmities, little children that are born with diseases, old people who are not productive anymore, or anybody in between, as Regis Martin says in the article, who is on the unproductive list. We just deem you to be no longer productive. Joe, that's a long-winded way of saying, I'm not sure that you could reach out to, again, not all, but I think many of these people are completely devoid of God. They see no transcendent meaning to life, no particular value to human life outside of their own, of course. Okay. But nothing special in the way that Judeo Christianity has always taught. We are special and made in the image and likeness of God. That goes out the window. And then, Joe, anything goes. And quite frankly, Joe, if people live that way long enough, the scales just keep growing thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker, and to the point where the only thing that will convert them is God himself. That's
Well,
my answer.
that's where I think that's where I've said in the past, and I think you're basically echoing it. It can't be a political solution
No.
because all you're doing, even if we had, let's just say, for argument's sake, after this horrendous period of Biden, objectively speaking, when we're not even 2 years in, the suffering that is going on, objectively speaking, X's
Yes.
and O's, ledger on the right side, ledger on the left side, input, output is horrendous.
Yeah.
The financial suffering that is going on in this country right now is epic. It's epic, from baby food to gasoline prices to food costs. to airline costs. I can go on and on and on.
Joe, by the way, real quick, you talk about making up lists of unproductive people and blah, blah, blah. Remember something, these shortages do not affect the people that are affecting these shortages.
Because they got
That
money, Joe.
right, well,
Rich
that's what I know.
people.
That's what I mean, Joe.
Yeah. I
That's
mean,
what I
I
mean.
can
They have
remember talking to and I'll get back to my thought, but like
go
a
ahead, go
friend of
ahead.
mine taught at Morristown Baird. It's like a $50,000 a year high school. He taught math there. I went to high school with him. And he was telling me this was during the Great Recession. He was like, Joe, nothing's changed for these people. Nothing. And people
Right.
during that time, it was a 10-year period, tough times, people losing houses,
Sure.
more, the whole deal. He was like, Joe, rich people, not a problem. But
Right.
getting back to my point with this, I mean, this is objectively speaking, I'm not talking about having any type of political identity. This has been a horrendous hardship on Americans of all stripes, from Hawaii to Maine. Yet, and say as a result of it, we have 16 years of conservative leadership, 2 presidents, 2 terms each. As a
Mhm.
result of this horrendous, it's not going to happen that way, but just say
Right, go ahead.
the ideas are not going away. They
Right,
just get squashed down. You
right.
see, how do we solve it? And that's what I think I want to get to the bottom of. And the only way, and I think this was a great book, I recommend people to read it, is Beheading Hydra by Father Dwight Longendecker,
Mhm.
is through holiness. You have to show, maybe not, there are people who never, ever will listen. Christ couldn't convert some people. Christ, he said, think about this. He said this, forget about what I say. Look at the works that I do. And people
Right,
still weren't having it. So,
right.
how do you convert the people, not the 10% on the way left, but that 80% in the middle? And
Mhm.
you don't have to really convert the people on the far right. In some ways, you have to too. How do you get them? It's and Father Dwight lays it out very well. I'm giving him a big plug. If people know who he is, we know him. He's been on our show a bunch of times. Read his book. It's through holiness.
Right.
People have to see Christ in you. They have to see how your life is joyful, is effective, and producing good fruit. Now, there's that 10%, they're not going to listen, but there's that 80%. That's how we change America.
I
Only way,
agree.
the only way.
I agree. I think I spent over the weekend, Joe. I went to I guess you would call it a men's conference. Jesse Romero was there, a bunch of great guys. Everybody knows I'm out in Arizona now. Okay, that was what you just talked about was actually the theme. Jesse gave a talk there. We're gonna have him on the show, by the way, for all you Crusaders out there and anybody following us at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. We're gonna have him on the show over the next couple of weeks, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But Joe, that was his theme. But now he was talking about we're getting a new bishop here. Olmsted, did you know he's retiring? By the way.
I did hear.
Yeah, so Bishop Olmsted retiring, and quite frankly, there's a little concern with his successor, Bishop Dolan. We'll see what happens. But Jesse made a good point. But I think it echoes what you were saying in the area of politics. Jesse turned around. And he says, "No pope ever saved me. The pope is not going to save me. My bishop is not going to save me." Now he wasn't diminishing their importance, Joe Resinella. Okay, let's be clear. Just like being political in America. We're of the opinion that, yeah, you need to be political. You need to get out and vote. And in as much as you can affect things in a positive way, I think, have an obligation to do that. But never forget, whether you're talking about the church and the salvation of your soul, whether you're talking about the good of society or a renewal of our culture, okay, to a more life affirming culture and not this abyss that we call a culture. Yes, we have to put God first. Everything else is just going to
But
fall by the
I
wayside.
think it's even more than that. Obviously, that's a commandment. We have to reflect God.
That's
We
what I
have
meant, Joe.
to,
That's what I
like,
meant. Is that was
yeah,
the
yeah.
theme of what they were saying was that if in fact, because remember something, Joe, in this particular night that I'm talking about, it ended, and I think appropriately enough for this conversation, it ended with 100 guys, between 100 and 200 guys praying the rosary together at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night
But I'm
in
even
Phoenix,
talking about, I'll
Arizona.
use an example. I'm reading the book that we interviewed the head of sales at Ignatius Press about Padre Pio right now, written by Father Gabriel Moore. the great exorcist from Italy. And he talked about how people used to go see Padre Pio. And he was talking about Forgio, which is a part of Italy where he lived, and how it was impossible to get there. Impossible. Yet people kept going. Like, dude, they had a mule road. The trains, that's exactly what he said.
Joe, I don't want to be on that road. I got to be.
But that's my point. He said it didn't have sanitation. It didn't have electricity. It was completely in the middle of nowhere. Yet people went there
Right.
and kept going back.
Right.
Why? Because they saw God in Padre Pio. And because they saw God in him, they changed. You see, there is the secret. Now, I'm going to tell you this, because I read this about Catherine of Siena, who was a great reformer. And I've even seen this in action. And I'm not going to point fingers at people, because I try not to do that on social media. People who are, big time Catholic guys who now are not. Because if you try to fix the church or society outside of God, like you would try to fix a secular thing, you wind up getting frustrated. And sometimes you may even find yourself leaving the church. Because ultimately, the only thing that fixes the church are saints. Because the business of changing hearts is God. It's not you. It's not me.
Well,
it's
Joe,
not words.
But then there's
and
the
that's
spillover.
where the interior, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not undercutting talking about the truth. I'm not undercutting. I'm talking about reaching people in the middle, not the people who are so far gone. And even sometimes you reach one of those. They have to see someone, I'll just use Padre Pio, that stops traffic. And that's possible for everybody. I'm telling you this right now.
Joe, I agree. I mean, and you're right. It does stop traffic. But now here's the thing, though. We are, as Americans, we are appealing to more than just Catholics. And I would say that you are spot on. But as a follow through, I would recommend. Okay, let's say for argument's sake, all right, you want to try to convert people to the church, okay? And you need saints to do that, obviously, who are a very good example. I think now again, let's just take it from the religious level for a second, okay? Because I do want to move on. I want to make sure we have enough time to talk about everything tonight at the Frontline with Joe and Joe on the Crusade channel. We can, Joe, then follow that through into, let's say, for argument's sake, American society and American culture. Because I will say this, they asked me to say a few words. Jesse did over the weekend, Joe. I know I have a big mouth, but you give me a microphone in front of 100 guys, I didn't prepare anything. I get a little nervous. I'm not going to lie to you, but I spoke from my heart. Okay. And I think, and I've said this before on the show, I've said this in other areas when it comes to pro-life witness. I think that part of the reason why Roe versus Wade is about to get overturned is because of that pro-life witness on a American societal and cultural level. I would say that we need to take a lesson from what you just said and apply that to say, how do we change America? And Joe, I don't think we will, by the way. I think I think we're too old. Not that we're old men, but I think we're too old to actually affect real change. But I think we could plant enough seeds in the next generation. My point in this diatribe is that 100, 200, 300 Catholic men praying the rosary, that stops traffic. I don't care what anybody says. I made the point last night, and I made the point on this show, Joe. In other words, do you know what happens when 100 people are praying the rosary in front of Planned Parenthood? If you want to talk about stopping traffic and affecting change, Planned Parenthood has a 75% no-show rate. That means 75% of the appointments that are made by women that are going in to kill their baby, they don't go in. Now, again, I'm making a parallel, Joe. So I want to be clear about that, because I think what you said is spot on. But we could, again, apply what you said in principle. Also, if we want to do something good for what seems to be, Joe, right now, our godforsaken society and our culture. Because it really is, and we're going to get into it more in the next segment. Okay, it really is a pretty dark place right now.
But praying obviously is important. I do it, and that's very, very important. It's a huge witness, and we rely on Our Lady's intercession. But what I'm talking about is something it's the byproduct of praying. And I'll use an example of that. Mother Teresa's first apostolate was a home for the dying. I've been in it. It was a hostel next to the goddess Kali. It's a Hindu goddess of destruction. It's right next door to it in Calcutta, and it's surrounded by the red light district, prostitution's everywhere,
Right.
all around it. That's where she, to this day, it's still operating, but that's where she started. Now, when she went there, the Hindus were hostile towards her. In fact, they threatened her physically and her sisters. They wanted to kill her.
Mhm.
And that went on for some time. And there was a story that a man went into the structure and saw the work itself of what they were doing. He came out to the crowd. This is a radicalized Hindu. And he said, when your mothers, sisters, and wives do what those nuns do, I'll shut it down. And then it stopped.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm talking about. She converted his heart by the action. That's what we have to do. And that is hard. But that's why saints change the culture. We have to become them. I'm telling you this. If
Joe,
you
you're
are
right.
aggravated, all the people who listen to these things and look at social media as I do in the morning and are frustrated and aggravated, my advice to you, and this is the advice I give to myself, is double down on a radical Catholic lifestyle. Have a big family. Give to the poor. Live modestly. Be good to your neighbor. Go out of your way to help people, and you will radiate the light of Christ to the world. And you will change your circle. And you know something? You might accomplish a lot more than you think you will.
Joe, no question about what you're saying. But I would say this, though. I think what you're describing is, number one, it's correct. Okay. I'm not just saying that because, we were at the front line with Joe and Joe. I think what you're saying is spot on. I do think, and some people may ask Joe Rossinello, that there's a little bit of urgency because what you're talking about requires some time. And we're going to get into it, okay? Because one thing that they're not allowing us, again, Joe, I'm not disagreeing with you. I agree that that is probably central to what we're supposed to be doing. But the urgency is they're not allowing us any time. I do want to say this, though, about Bishop Von Galen, before we move on to Eric Sammons.
The
Remember,
Lion
he
of
was
Munster.
the Lion of Munster. That one's not going away anytime soon. The Lion of Munster. But Joe, he stood up against the Nazis. He stood up about he stood up against their evil ideas. They did not kill him. According to Regis Martin, Bormann wanted to kill him. Himmler wanted to kill him. Hitler didn't want to make a martyr out of him. Now, the good bishop ended up dying after the war, shortly after the war, but he wasn't killed by the Nazis. But he stood up to them. And the bottom line is this. If you think that type of situation can't happen here, and we're going to expand on that in the next two segments, then you're wrong. And I will say this. I love Joe quoting T.S. Eliot. There's a reason why the T.S. Eliot is as widely known and valued as a poet in the last 100 years. T.S. Eliot wrote, quote, "If you will not have God." Okay, now he wrote this just before the Second World War. This is about 15 to 20 years after he had already written The Wasteland. Okay, he said, "If you will not have God, who is a jealous God, then go pay your respects to Hitler and Stalin." And Regis Martin says, it's not yet certain to whom we're going to be paying our respects, but more and more, if we don't do, Joe Rossinello, what you're saying, okay, if we don't bring God back into the equation and live in a life of personal holiness, okay, more and more, it's not been God. Now, I think that's spot on. Do not think that in all these totalitarian regimes, these tyrannical regimes, whether it's Hitler or Stalin, who you will pay your respects to, okay, if you don't have God, don't think it can't happen here, because it's happening here now, and you have your head in the sand if you think it's not. And Eric Sammons at Crisis Magazine, okay, the title of his article, Joe Rossinello, is "You Will Comply." Sounds an awful lot like tyranny to me. I'm handing it over to you.
Well, Eric Sammons, who's been on our show, basically he's talking about Pride Month, which is, also June it's not really Pride Month. It's the month of the Sacred Heart. But
That's right. That's right.
In the secular world, it is viewed as Pride Month. And Major League Baseball teams across America are hosting a Pride Night. Now, he quotes a Tampa Bay Rays player. I believe his name, he's a pitcher, Jason Adams. And this is what he had to say. I think his quote is very interesting. And it's funny, a friend of mine that I grew up with posted this on Facebook actually during the week. So when you pointed it out, Joe, I said, oh gosh, it definitely is something we should talk about. It said, because ultimately we all said that we want what we want is them to know that all are welcome and loved here, talking about basically a pride night. But when we put it on our bodies, talking about symbols they had to wear on their uniforms, I think a lot of guys decided that it's just a lifestyle that maybe, not that we look down on anyone or thinking differently, it's just that maybe we don't want to encourage it if we believe in Jesus, who's encouraged us to live a lifestyle that would abstain from that behavior. Now, that's not being judgmental, he says. It's not looking down. It's just what we believe the lifestyle he, as in Jesus, is encouraging us to live for our good, not to withhold. But again, we love these men and women. We care about them, and we want them to feel safe and welcome here. You see, that is perfectly fine and respectful and caring, and that is a wonderful statement, and it's spot on. But that's
And
not
he's
accepted.
getting wrecked. I'm going to
And
give it
that's
to you,
not
Joe.
accepted.
And he's getting wrecked in the press.
And that is the sad thing. You see, that is not accepted. And again, I'm going to use baseball as an example. I think it's a big mistake. They're obviously doing it similarly because of the NFL, because of their corporate sponsorship, because all the corporations, and we're going to talk about that next from Horvat's article on Wall Street, making some comments similar to that. Ultimately, how do people respond? As the church says, on the lowest common denominator, subsidiarity. What do we do to that? Stop going to baseball games. You see, we are in control. Whether you realize it or not, people are in control. We give these people money and they slap us across the face.
Oof.
Who's the fool?
Well, us.
Stop giving them money. They use their leverage. Corporate sponsorship uses their leverage on baseball, makes them do that. And basically, baseball says, I know they're still going to come to the game so we can get away with it. And frankly, that's exactly what happens.
Right.
This man is being completely respectful. I don't know if he's Catholic or not, but the Catholic Church says this. You have to, first of all, it calls all people who have same-sex attraction. It calls them to live a life that's of chastity. It calls it what it is. It's a sin. It calls the behavior disordered, which it is. And it also says that people, i.e. Catholics, have to respect them and cannot discriminate against them. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but if you look it up, and I believe it's 2358 and 2359. So if you want to Google it, go for it in the catechism.
Well, this guy might not be Jason Adam. He might not
But
be
even
Catholic,
still, if
but
he
it's
wasn't,
also
this is a
but
perfect
it's a Catholic
response to a
statement.
Catholic. This
Yeah,
is
but
it's
he
perfect.
he gave the right response. I'm not putting it on my body. Now, but again, now if you look at, I think her name is Sarah Spain. She's with ESPN. Okay, Joe Rossinello. She went ballistic. She went ballistic, talking and basically belittled the guy. And of course, it all goes back to science because he's saying that this is a lifestyle. She disagreed with him saying lifestyle. It is a lifestyle. Sorry, it is. You're not born that way. No science. You've been stretching for the science now for a long time. All right. And looking for that gene that you say determines whether or not you have a same-sex attraction. Doesn't exist. Okay. Now, have a same-sex attraction, or do you possess a same-sex attraction due to a very difficult circumstance, rupture of a relationship with your father, perhaps, being abused by a parent, perhaps, something along those lines, which are horrible circumstances? Sure. That's why I'm not going to judge you in that way. But nonetheless, at some point beyond the age of reason, you can make a decision to do something about it. Therefore, yes, it is a lifestyle. It is. And you're not born that way. I want to help you, and I do love you, and I am welcoming to you, but I'm not wearing your propaganda on my body. And that's what the problem is here, Joe, because we're talking in this conversation at the Frontline with Joe and Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello, in the Breach on the Crusade channel. We're talking about this because we're talking about tyranny. Now, this tyranny is coming from Major League Baseball.
Well, here's the deal. And people, like, I'm not a baseball player, but I can make a choice. And what I could do is not watch it. That's what I could do. Now, what he has to do is make a choice. You either do it and that could mean your livelihood. Now, Christ is very clear about this in Scripture, that you will suffer. He says this very clearly. He said, if they persecute me, they will persecute you. Now, that's part of the deal. Civil disobedience doesn't mean you always get your way.
No.
You see, but this is my point. If this man, this could cost him his job. And if I don't think it will, but it could. And my point is, there could come a point where the line in the sand comes to that.
Right.
It has in other countries. When it's come to faith, it happened in Northern Ireland. It's happening in Cuba as we speak. It's a choice.
Well,
And
elaborate
this-
on that, Joe, because I'm actually unclear. What is going on in Cuba? I
Well,
wasn't
Cuba,
aware of
I talked to a nun, a missionary charity who served in Cuba. They control the food. You may not get
okay.
certain food
Gotcha.
rations if you go to church. Your kids may not get educated.
Right.
You're quasi and indirectly punished if you're
It's like
a
that.
practicing.
It's like the social credit system we talked about a while
Similarly,
ago.
yeah, you can go to church, but there's a cost. And my point is, in Northern Ireland at that time, during the conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics, I mean, you couldn't get a job in Belfast if you're Catholic. You could not get a job. You wouldn't get hired. My
Right.
point is this: there's a cost, and that is Christ says it very clearly. And to be honest with you, we're not quite there yet. I mean, there's pinches that are going on. You know, you kind of get indirectly pushed to the side. You might be an outcast. You may not get invited to certain things. People might make fun of you, but it's not outright they're arresting you or they're killing you or anything to that effect. Could that happen? Sure. Why not? It's happened in other countries. It's happened within the last 100 years in very modern countries like Mexico. So, I mean, like, I'll tell you what, though, I will say this, as the court stands right now, if they fired him, I think he would have recourse. I really do. I think if he took it to the court and said, under my First Amendment rights to freedom of religion, I have every right to say that I cannot do this, and I think he would win. I do. However,
Right. And here's the thing. You're right. The only problem is, the fear is that he maybe, listen, like all baseball players, he could have a little bit of a cold streak, go on a losing streak. And the fear is that they use that as a pretense to get rid of the guy because they're all caving to this. I mean, to what really is a very hateful movement. I want to read this to you. I'm not big on reading a lot of these things. I like to pull out points, but I think this is an important little paragraph from Eric Sammons. I want to let our audience know about it. The Frontline with Joe and Joe. He says, years ago, when the gay rights movement demanded more and more, you'd often hear the activists say, "Why are you opposed to gay rights? This won't impact your life in any way." Of course, now this is Sammons talking. Of course, they don't even try to say that anymore. Okay, as everyone knows, it's a lie. They're no longer calling for tolerance, but compliance. You must agree with their lifestyles, no matter how aberrant and sinful. And if you don't show public support, i.e., Joe Rossinello, putting that patch on your uniform, okay? If you don't agree with that, if you publicly show your support for what every generation, now this is the important part, for what every generation before ours knew to be physically, mentally, psychologically, and spiritually unhealthy, then you could lose your job, your friends, and anything else you might value. Joe, listen, these guys, I always said this about athletes, Joe, highest level athletes, professional baseball players, basketball players, football players, they work hard their whole lives. They're playing baseball from the time they know how to say mommy and daddy. And you think about this guy's probably in his 20s, okay, after working 15, 20 years busting his hump to become a Major League Baseball player. And because he doesn't comply with the rainbow mob, with the rainbow mafia, that he could lose his job. Joe, the way Sammons put it was this. He says, and I want your thoughts on this. He said, one day, the rainbow flag will go down in history as a symbol of hatred and oppression. And when that day comes, sensible people will look back at these corporations and wonder how they did not know they were the bad guys. But up until then, let's pray for and support those who resist the immense pressure to comply with this regime. Joe, let me tell you something. I'm going to hand it over to you. To me, again, you don't have to agree. Nobody out there listening to me has to agree. The rainbow flag is no different to me, no different a symbol than the Nazi flag, no different than the hammer and sickle. It all represents oppression and hatred.
Well, I wouldn't go that far in terms of saying that, but what I would say is I think that the picture on the Tampa Bay Rays says it exactly right. I don't hate you. I'm not judging you. I am a Christian. It is biblical, and I can't do this. And he was respectful. That's all it is. And is there a message of intolerance to people who think that way as a result of this movement? Yes, absolutely. Many times people become like the very people they despise. That happens. And there is some measure, because they have now some political power, that again, this man is not taking a hateful stance. He's basically just saying, I'm a Christian. As I would say, I'm a Catholic.
Joe, I
And
gotta
I'm not,
cut you off for 1 second. Sarah, I think her name's Sarah Spain on ESPN. She said that not wearing the patch is an act of hatred. I
well,
just
I
want
would
to say,
disagree with her, and I would debate her openly. If she what like I would,
you know, she's not going to debate. Joe
no,
Russell.
but my point is that's not like granted, that might be a popular idea. This guy is spot on. And I do think there are objective people out there who would agree, but sadly, and we've said this on the show, they've won. They've won over the culture. Homosexuality now, which by the way is a mortal sin. From I'm a Catholic, and I'm just going to tell you the straight up and down truth of it. It's not only a Catholic teaching, which I just recited to you, Catechism 23, 58, 59. We just did an interview. That's how I know this. We just interviewed someone yesterday talking about this subject. So it's pretty fresh in my head. But it's also biblical. So even if you're a Protestant, it's biblical. It's in the book of Leviticus. It's biblical. Now, you could choose to ignore it. That doesn't change the reality. It
Right.
doesn't change the reality. And ultimately, while it could impact this man's livelihood, I rather go to heaven. And here's the thing. Now, that's sad. And frankly, there's going to be a lot of choices that people are going to have to make. It could be Catholics can't become doctors because they
Right.
have to perform abortions in med school. They could be Catholics can't teach in a public
Joe,
school.
I read an article. They got it all now. They have every institution in America now. Okay, they got every institution. Okay, so the bottom line is this: no, it's only going to now that they have every inch in the room. Okay, like you said, they have the medical schools. You listen. I don't give a. Let me not use the word I was about to use. I don't give a darn. Okay, about the November elections. Okay, which that's what everybody's look at what's going to happen. It's a red wave, Joe Resinello. It's a red tsunami, and the country's going to be saved. Bull crap, BS. I'm calling BS on that. You want to know why? You're not doing anything to take back these institutions. Joe Resinello, what you just said to me is one of the more scary things out there. That an 18, 20, 22-year-old pre-med student, or then soon to be medical school student, is going to be forced to have to learn and perform abortions if they want to first get their license at some point and then keep their medical license. This is America.
Well,
This is what we're dealing.
That's where they're intolerant, and that is persecution. No question about it. It's happened in other countries, and frankly, it's beginning to happen here. But ultimately, I'll tell you this: I actually think winning the institutions, that's easy. I actually think the hard part is winning the heart. The institution is easy because money moves the institution. Just like we saw with Netflix, and this will bridge us into the next story. If enough people stop supporting these institutions, baseball, the NFL, Starbucks, and listen, here's the deal. You got to live. I mean, I like We're in the world. We're not of it. I'm just going to be fully like honest with you. I'm not going to churn butter in my backyard in Hasbrook Heights. I don't have the
You're not
time.
going to do that, Joe.
No, I'm just
You-
being
you-
honest. I'm not, I don't have the time. I have 5 kids. I am a very busy man. I
No,
can't do it.
I thought you were going to go out and buy a couple cows and
I'm
pigs
not
and
doing that.
slaughter them
But what I
yourself.
can do is what I will do. And what I will do is if I see a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts, I'm going to go to this Dunkin' Donuts. And I like Starbucks coffee too. Just not that it's a big sacrifice, but I don't watch the NFL. I will not support Major League Baseball. If the institution is the easy hurdle, because it's not enough people with conviction. We
Right.
don't have conviction. And if we had it, there are so many people. If we stood shoulder to shoulder with Orthodox Jews, traditional Protestants, and traditional Catholics in America from Hawaii to Maine, all these institutions cave so fast that your head would spin. They would turn on the gay population quicker than you could blink an eye.
Joe, let's real quick. I want to segue into John Horvat, our friend Pedro. God bless you, Pedro, if he's listening to us out there. He sent us this article that John
I saw him in
Horvat.
Mass today, by the way. He was in
Oh, okay,
Lyndhurst,
beautiful.
him and his wife, Inez.
Yeah, love Pedro. He sent us this article. He's a big TFP guy. And John Horvat obviously does a lot of work and does, I would say, all of his work with TFP. But I do want to put something in perspective, Joe, before I introduce this to you and the audience. The market cap right now of Netflix is $81 billion. It was and the stock is at about $180 a share. So it's been cut down by about 70% from its high. And it goes to show you that, yeah, if enough people get a little fed up. Now, of course, they blamed other things for that. No, your wokeness is what caused probably the majority of that downturn. If you can combine that with the NASDAQ being down over the last month, yeah, that's a pretty big shave. You're talking about your market cap going to 80 billion from about 400 billion. Don't tell me it's just because of the market. It's because of stupid decisions that you've made. And it shows, Joe, that we can have an effect. Again, albeit it might start out to be a small one. Like you said, you don't go to Starbucks, you go to Dunkin' Donuts. I do the same thing. I'm not going to Starbucks. I got rid of HBO. I don't have Netflix anymore. I'm about to drop the hammer on Amazon and Sling if they don't stay in line. I might just watch YouTube for now. Subscribe to the Crusade channel. That's always a good idea. Subscribe to the Frontline with Joe and Joe on YouTube. That's always a good idea. And by the way, Joe, as a quick aside, somebody's mentioning it. Father Imperato, Stephen Imperato, everybody out there knows him. Please pray for him. He's not, I'm not sure how he's doing, but he did have, at least from what we understand, a mild heart attack. So please pray for Father Stephen Imperato. God knows how many babies he has helped to save in the pro-life struggle that we're in. But here's the thing, Joe. Let's get back to Wall Street and Netflix, okay, and other woke corporations. Wall Street, according to John Horvat, is building an abortion apartheid regime, okay? And basically, I think in layman's terms, what that means is they're heavy hitters on Wall Street, the wokesters that, Joe, let's face it, they have a lot more money than you and me and most people, okay? They're actually, it seems, I want your thoughts on this. It seems, according to John Horvat, that they might actually be willing to sacrifice and shave a portion of the bottom line in order to promote their woke agenda. In this case, it focuses on states that will either severely curtail or ban abortions. That these companies that they own shares in are not going to be allowed to do business in those states, or perhaps close their facilities in those states, thereby costing them those states certain level of jobs. Joe, I'm throwing it over to you because to me,
Well,
that's part of the scariness of all this.
basically how obviously business works as well as politics is it exudes power through leverage. That's how business operates. It exudes power through leverage. I have leverage over you, a competitor, therefore I will exercise that leverage and get power. Same in politics. That's how it works. Now, to John Horvat's point, and he is a friend of the show, we've interviewed him a number of times. Phenomenal book. You should all get it. Return to Order.
Return to Order.
Very good read. Very important read. Let me first say that. I definitely think that you're seeing this woke behavior in corporations, virtue signaling. My personal opinion, I think it's a mistake. I think we just used the example of Netflix. It cost them. And to John Horvat's point, we have seen leveraged use in states like South Dakota, where basically corporations said, we will pull jobs out of your state because of your position on traditional marriage, not permitting same. I believe that was the situation. Am I correct? Or no, it was transgender bathrooms or something along those
Yeah,
lines
and
with
then
Kristen
the
Bell.
NCAA threatened to pull
There you
out,
go.
and
Now, in South Dakota, the business may have leverage. And frankly, the governor then has to make a choice. They say, I'm going to lose this employment. So therefore, I may lose the election because jobs are going to leave my state and that's going to impact my power. And I have to make a decision. Am I willing to make a decision of conscience or of the world? And we make those decisions constantly. But ultimately, there's other examples of leverage being used against them. And we saw that in Florida
Florida.
with DeSantis. Now,
Mhm.
DeSantis used leverage. He said to Disney, I don't like what you're doing. And guess what? I'm going to take away your privileges. Tax privileges is going to cost you money. And they folded. So leverage is the key. That's what I'm saying. Now,
Right,
are there states where these type of companies can do that and get away with it? Oh, yes. No question. And then governors are going to have to make a choice.
right.
And people are going to have to make a choice. Do you support the position or do you support, say, the employment, or you like blah, blah, blah.
Right.
However, again, virtue signaling in the company, this is where I kind of break from the point. Ultimately, we're seeing this at CNN. They just ousted the old president of CNN, and the new president, the CEO, is basically saying you got to reel it back a little bit.
Right.
Are you listen? Companies, you could virtue signal to a point, but when the dividend goes down, you're not in that business.
But here's the problem, Joe. The people that own the shares of those companies that are exerting this pressure. See, the boards of I agree with you, Joe. I think where Horvat's going with this, he's singling out BlackRock, State Street, and these behemoth funds that own very large chunks of shares in publicly traded companies. So, Joe, I agree with you. But the boards of directors are the ones that are getting bullied by these Wall Street guys who come in and say, well, we own a certain amount of shares, so we have a certain amount of say. Now you get a company that's not woke, the board of directors saying, hey, man, we're morally neutral. We're selling widgets. Remember in economics class, the generic term for your product is a widget, okay? So we're selling widgets. We don't care if a person's gay or straight or whatever they are. We just want to sell widgets, man, okay? Now these guys, because again, Joe, these are elites, it doesn't cost them money. Okay. If they go in and they bully the boards of directors, even if the stock goes down, Joe, these guys are still rich. But what they are able to do is they're able to enforce their cultural depravity on these boards of directors and using the leverage that they have. Because again, they're not making decisions that are in the best interest of the corporations. Only the boards of directors are going to do that. And to your point, Joe, you're correct. But that's not who we're fighting against. We're fighting against BlackRock and the rest of them that send in their operatives to tell these boards of directors, okay, listen, you're going to do what we tell you to do. The way Horvat put it like this, he says, the time of moral neutrality is ending. Public companies will soon be forced to make decisions bearing on moral issues, even when they hurt their bottom lines. They will soon be violating free markets by refusing to serve carved out sectors that do not conform to leftist moral standards. One more quick point, Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you. Many conservatives have complained about what they call the ESG rating system. Now, Joe, I was shocked to hear this. I knew something about this, but I didn't think how prevalent it was. And it's similar to what we talk about. We talk about the social credit score, okay? This liberal compliance tool rates companies on how they comply with environmental, social, and corporate governance targets. With Roe versus Wade, with the controversy because of Roe versus Wade, some activist stockholders are adding an A to the ESG score for abortion. And they're actually going to tell these corporations where they cannot can and cannot do business. I want to mention one thing about leverage, Joe, and then I want your opinion. Can you imagine? Let's say 100 million people in America actually agreed with us on what we're saying. Now, again, that's about a third, a little bit less than a third of people. But let's say 100 million people in America say, you know what? Yeah, I am going to stop buying Starbucks. And yeah, I'm not going to do business with HBO, and I'm going to cancel Netflix. Do you think that would have am I wrong if I said, that would have a tremendous impact? The problem is we don't use the leverage we already have. Joe Resinello, I know that was
Well, that's a
long-winded,
fact.
but what do you have to
Well,
say about that?
Well, I'll tell you what, you're right. From that perspective, BlackRock could use leverage. And you're seeing that in the NFL. The people who go to the NFL games are not woke. But who's putting leverage on Goodell? His corporate sponsors.
Right.
And so it's similar. But again, it comes down to the lowest common denominator. We, the people, have to have enough of, frankly, enough of I've had it, I'm not going to take it anymore, and boycott. You see, it comes down to that. It doesn't matter what BlackRock does. It doesn't matter what the corporate sponsorship does. You tell me that if 80% of people who go to NFL games stopped going, 80, that Goodell wouldn't cave? If you tell me that BlackRock went into a state and tried to do that, and people just said, I'm going to do without that. That's how Gandhi threw out the English without a bullet. He stopped buying their textiles, and he made salt from the Indian Ocean. And he defeated the strongest nation in the world, one of at the time, without firing a bullet. Economic boycotting works. We just don't have enough principle, and we don't care.
Well, let me ask you this. You mentioned earlier in the show at the Frontline with Joe and Joe, you talked about doing things personally. Let's say let's call it in more secular terms, striving to be a better person. We call it in Catholic terms, becoming a more holy person. But is not part of that, Joe Ressino, if you are convicted, okay? If you are a person who says, I'm tired of this stuff, shouldn't we then ask that person or try to implore that person to say, well, then maybe why aren't you giving up this company, that company, that company, and that company? Why do you still use these company services when they slap you in the face? Why don't you say to yourself, Joe, I'll give you an example. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I remember when Michael Medved, the film critic, who's very conservative, by the way, I remember was shocked. He said, I don't have a TV in my home. My kids don't watch TV. Okay. I was shocked when I heard that. Then I know that you do that. Okay. I know you have a TV, but you don't use it to watch good programming. But Michael Medved said, I don't even have a TV. I was shocked when I heard that. And you want to know what? In hindsight, that's absolutely what we're supposed to be doing. Just shut it off. You need to watch HBO in order to be fulfilled? You need to watch Netflix in order to be fulfilled? Dunkin' Donuts ain't good enough for you. You gotta go to Starbucks. Pick any one of these companies, Joe. I mean, if we're trying to convince people, like you said, okay, at the very least, if you're not going to listen to a couple of Catholic guys like us and convert to the Catholic Church, would you agree with us that our country's in a mess? How about you listen to us and maybe say to yourself when you wake up tomorrow, you know what? I'm going to start Xing certain things out of my life and stop taking my hard-earned money and put it into the pockets of people that want nothing more than to destroy me, my wife, and my kids. Am I wrong, Joe?
People don't have self-discipline and they're not convicted enough. Joe, listen, we are fat Elvis. America right now. It's 1971 Elvis. We are not a people. We're not a lean and mean nation. We don't have strong wills. We don't have discipline. I mean, this is not that nation. And we're not like, that's one thing. I'll tell you something. That's one thing about being a practicing Catholic. You have to have self-mastery. And that doesn't happen. That's one of the mistakes men make. Frankly, I'm going to tell you this right now when they get married, because they think you're all of a sudden going to be a virtuous person. People who aren't a practicing like Catholic, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm going to get married in the church and I'm going to be a good husband and a good father. Really? You're just going to flip a switch and all of a sudden you're going to be a virtuous person? It doesn't work that way. Virtue takes years and years and years, and self-mastery. That's where you have periods of Lent, Advent, fasting on Fridays, years and years. We're not that people anymore, Joe.
Right.
And to do those things, what you're talking about requires that. We like our stuff. We like to be comfortable. And frankly, we're not having it. We're not at that point yet. But I will say this, and I'll say it again. At the lowest common denominator, we destroy wokeness in a minute because we give them the money.
Right.
We provide the money.
Well, let me
And
say
we
this about
still
indifference.
do ask after they smack us in the face, and shame on us.
I
It's our own fault.
I agree. But I will say this. One thing we have to do as far as people of goodwill in America, Joe, and then I'm going to hand it over to you because we're running out of time on the Crusade channel. But real quick, Joe, when Nero decided he was going to persecute the Catholics, okay, in Rome, he would not have been able to set them on fire and line the streets of Rome with them, okay, lighting up the streets, if the people of Rome were possibly opposed to that, okay? My point in bringing that up is the Nazis could not have come to power without a certain level of indifference among the population. Stalin and Lenin, they could have never been successful in taking over Russia, okay, without a certain level of compliance from the population. The problem in America, Joe, I go through it every day when I go to work, okay? I'm in the hospitality industry. Throw a rock, you hit a liberal, okay? They actually believe all this BS. They don't mind if you lose your job and you're a conservative. Trust me on that. Okay. When the leak happened with Roe versus Wade, one of the servers in the place I work, who knows I'm conservative, did not talk to me all night because they know that I'm pro-life. Okay. My point in bringing this up is, Joe, it's the American people who are sympathetic to these corporations. We have to message. They're the problem because we have to get the message out to all the people of goodwill out there who are hesitant to pull the trigger when it comes to getting rid of these corporations as far as end your subscription, okay? And stop doing business with them. Our message should be, you need to start spreading this message of personal boycotting to all your friends out there. God willing, down the road, this is somewhat organized. But in the meantime, start costing that money. You just saw Netflix had their market cap shaved by 75%. If you think it can't work, you're wrong. Joe, I'm going to hand it over to you. We only have 1 minute.
What I would say is this, circling back to the first conversation, as Christ said, he said, if you don't believe the words, believe the works. People have all the things we're saying, I think would be effective. Financial boycotts, we're in control. If you don't believe the words, believe the works. Our lives have to bear good fruit. People have to see that. As the example I gave to Mother Teresa, converting someone who wanted to do her physical harm. We have to show people, show me. And when we do, we will change the people in the middle. But until then, it's just words. Christ couldn't convince them with his words alone. He said it.
Right.
If you don't believe my words, believe my works. Show me. And
Right.
to all the people who are in the chat room and to all the people who are frustrated, I say it again. Channel that into a radical Catholic Christian lifestyle. Radical love, radical self-giving, and you will convince people.
I agree.
And you may not even have to say a word.
Joe Rossinello, we got to leave it there. John's in the chat room. John asked if we could speak to Roe versus Wade being overturned. John, unfortunately, we don't have time. I will say this. I would expect some action this week. I think we should see something this week. And then we all have to keep our eyes open, and we're all going to have to do a lot of praying. Joe and I will get to that. I'm sure we're going to be talking about that when the decision is handed down. We'll be talking about the reaction, probably talking about a bunch of things. In the meantime, we love you all. We love you all for listening to us and joining us here at the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Become a subscriber so you can have access to all of the station's content and wherever you see Joe and I on social media, particularly the Frontline on YouTube, like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. Help us out. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. We will talk to you soon.